Good evening and welcome to the Oklahoma City Museum of Art and tonight's members' celebration of the exhibition Discovering Ansel Adams. We are grateful to the exhibition's presenting sponsors, Kirsten and David Griffin, plus the many donors who contributed to this exhibition and this season. And thank you, our devoted members who make our mission possible with your continued support. Now for tonight's presentation and speaker, the title, A Journey of Discovery, My Life with Ansel Adams, by the exhibition's curator, Dr. Rebecca Senf. Dr. Senf is Chief Curator at the Center for Creative Photography at the University of Arizona in Tucson. Our speaker received her BA in Art History from the University of Arizona and her MA and PhD from Boston University. She began her career at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, where she co-curated a major exhibition of the work of Ansel Adams drawn from the Lane Collection, which at the time was the largest collection of his work in private hands. Over the course of her career, she has curated at least 50 exhibitions, including her recent Richard Avedon Relationships, which was shown in Milan and Palermo, Italy, and Rotterdam in the Netherlands, as well as other monographic exhibitions and shows dedicated to such movements or themes as Group F64 and California Pictorialism. Dr. Senf has contributed chapters, interviews, and essays to over a dozen publications, and in 2020, released her book on Adams' early years called Making a Photographer, which was co-published by the CCP and Yale University Press. Of note, it's also available for sale in the museum store. Hint, hint. Please welcome to the stage, Rebecca Senf.
So nice to see everyone tonight. I'm delighted to be here. It's really exciting to be speaking to a full hall. I want to start by thanking folks here at the museum, Director Michael Anderson, Maury Ford, Jessica Provencher, Brian Chambers, Destiny Turbyfill, and Amber Thompson, as well as the entire staff at the museum, have been just a delight to work with, and it's been such a pleasure. I also want to thank the membership for your support of the museum. If we want art in our lives, we have to take action, and supporting your museum is a great way to do this. So thank you all for your support. So tonight I'm going to talk about the basic argument of the exhibition, Discovering Ansel Adams, and then I'll be happy to answer questions. My work on Ansel Adams began with my doctoral dissertation and was then published in book form in 2020. So I began my research on Ansel Adams in 2003. I was actually giving a lecture in Cincinnati talking about Ansel Adams when I realized that I've been with Ansel Adams longer than I was with my husband. So it's not unrealistic for me to talk about my life with Ansel Adams. So the basic question, and here's our introduction to our show here in Oklahoma City, and the book that was published in 2020. And as Brian said, it's available in the shop. Maybe you will be so enticed by this conversation tonight that you'll want to learn more about Ansel Adams. So my basic question was about Ansel Adams's early work. And I was intrigued to know, why is it that his picture, the one we're seeing here on the left, which he made around 1920, looks so dramatically different from the work that we recognize as Ansel Adams. So he develops the signature style. We knew when the signature style came in. It's around 1940. And from 1940 on, we see the signature style. But he doesn't start there. He starts with pictures like the one on the left. If you've already been up to the show, you've seen this teeny tiny, beautiful little print, delicate. It almost looks like a pencil drawing, and very different from the kind of contrasty picture, big print that we're seeing on the right-hand side. So that was my question to myself. How did he get from the picture on the left in 1920 to pictures like the one on the right around the 1940s? Part of what I realized had not been done anywhere in the scholarship yet was a description of what his signature style is. How do we recognize a picture as being by Ansel Adams? And so I used this picture. I think this is a good one to describe his signature style. And so this is Tetons in Snake River. It's made in 1942, so this is in that period where he's making works that are that familiar Ansel Adams style. And the first thing that we notice is that it's a panoramic sweep of landscape. So I'm going to go back. When you look at that little picture on the left, you can see how close we are to those trees. And in fact, it feels like we're standing on the grass that we're seeing in the picture. So we're really connected to that landscape. It's very intimate proximity. These later pictures were removed from it, and there's this panoramic sweep of landscape. Another thing that we're seeing is that he has chosen an omniscient viewpoint for the scene, meaning a godlike perspective. He's chosen to photograph the scene from a place that makes it seem as if that is the one, the only, the very best place where that could be photographed. And that gives this sense of kind of an overview of the scene, this God's eye view. He's also using light and weather effects to achieve a sense of drama, of ephemerality, of movement, of a kind of dynamic in the picture. And so in this case, we've got these dark, stormy clouds. We've got light breaking through onto the mountains. There's light illuminating that silvery river that moves through the foreground. And that light and weather is part of what creates the emotional engagement in the photograph. So by choosing this moment where we look at this picture and we know it couldn't have looked like that for very long prior to the picture, it didn't look like that for very long after the picture. So now not only has he chosen the very best spot to make the picture, but he's chosen the very best time to make this picture. And that light and weather effect increases our sense of awe, our sense of drama, our emotional connection to the picture. And he's using all of those qualities to create a persuasive photograph, one that makes us feel like we know how he felt when he was standing there. So it gives us this sense of being connected to the landscape, of being emotionally invested in what's happening there, of wanting to understand what that place is. And then the fourth characteristic that's typical of Ansel Adams is what I call a zone system look. How many of you out there are photographers or have printed in the darkroom? Can you raise your hand? Oh, a good number. I would say maybe a tenth of the group. So those of you who've been photographers may have heard of the zone system before. The zone system was a teaching tool that Adams used to help people create negatives that retained great detail in the negative so that you could make really beautiful and detailed prints. And that meant holding on to information in both the highlight areas and in the shadow areas so that even in these dark passages like this, there's still little bits of information there. And then even in the brightest parts along the river, there's still information there. And that became the understanding of what a beautiful print should look like. And so Adams used this teaching tool, the zone system, to create photographs that had this wide range of tones from the very darkest to the very brightest. And it creates a kind of look to his photographs. And especially when you go into the gallery and you're in the biggest room that has all of his signature style pieces, you'll recognize that there's a kind of common aesthetic about what those pictures look like. So those are those four signature style characteristics. So we're going to start our story with Ansel Adams when he was just a boy. This is a portrait of him. He was around the age of 14. He's holding his box brownie camera, which is a very rudimentary type of camera. It truly is a box. I'm hearing a little rumbling. Maybe people out there had box brownie cameras or recognize them from their family. So Ansel Adams took his box brownie camera with him to Yosemite Valley. He went with his parents. He was an only child, and he'd learned about Yosemite Valley, and he asked his parents to take him on summer vacation there. And so in the exhibition, we have a facsimile of this very precious object from the Ansel Adams Archive at the Center for Creative Photography. This is the photographic album that he produced of the snapshots from that very first trip to Yosemite. And it's interesting to me because it helps me see where his photographic journey began. This is Adams as an amateur, as a tourist visiting Yosemite National Park, and just the very beginnings of thinking about how to use a camera and to make photographs. These are not his own prints. He took the roll of film to the photo finisher in Yosemite Valley, so they were commercially developed and produced, just little snapshots. And so up in the gallery, you'll get to see the entire album. Because we've created it in facsimile, you can touch it, turn the pages, get a sense of what that album looks like. But again, for me, it was interesting because it gave me a sense of where he began in his career. I'm going to read you just a little passage of this letter that he writes home to his Aunt Mary. And she was actually the one who gave him a book about Yosemite Valley that piqued his interest and sent him asking his parents for the trip. I'm going to start reading from right here if you want to follow along. A couple of days ago, we went to Mirror Lake to see the sunrise. We then took the North Dome Trail up the Tenaya Canyon. It is a 21-mile trail, and we had the pleasure of walking about 1/4 of it. About 4 or 5 days ago, I went to the top of Yosemite Falls and Yosemite Point. I came back on fast time, covering 5 miles in 1 hour and 5 minutes. I have taken more than 85 good pictures. I've learned to swim and play pool and croquet. We expect to go to Glacier Point on Wednesday, either by the 11-mile trail or the ledge trail. We will go on the former on horses. Hoping that you are well and expecting to hear from you soon, I am Ansel Adams. Pretty cute, right? This 14-year-old writing home to his aunt. But it's interesting because it talks about the tourist pursuits, the hiking and the playing pool and croquet, the learning to swim. He's just a kid at this point, so he mentions photography, but it's as much about how many pictures he's made as what they're of or why he's making pictures. And it's kind of like his description of hiking. It's about how much distance he's covering, how fast. So he's just at the very beginnings at this point. He very rapidly connects to a much deeper way of relating to Yosemite Valley and the wilderness, and especially the high country outside of Yosemite Valley. So this is Ansel Adams with his mule. The mule was important because he's working with a camera that takes glass plate negatives. So in order to make these pictures that he's taking up above the rim of Yosemite Valley, he needed some help moving all of this heavy glass around with him. So all of his camera equipment went on that mule. These are very early days of hiking and camping before there was a kind of developed culture of hiking. So this is the early 20th century. And so the people who hiked and went on these journeys were really a very small subset of culture. Many of them belonged to the Sierra Club. Now we think of the Sierra Club as this massive political action committee that's about saving the environment, but it was begun as a hiking club in the Sierra Nevada mountains. That's where the name Sierra Club comes from. And so Adams was surrounded in Yosemite Valley by people who loved to hike and to camp. He had mentors who taught him how to do those things, how to cook over an open fire, how to predict what was happening with the weather so that you didn't get caught in a thunderstorm, things like the geology of the region, which was very interesting to the Sierra Club members because John Muir was the founder of the Sierra Club, and he had all these hypotheses about how the Sierra was formed in the Yosemite Valley. So this is Ansel Adams in his element as a young man, learning how to be a mountaineer, moving through the outdoors, spending nights, in a camp really getting to know the wilderness. This is one of the great documents in the archive. This is Ansel Adams writing home to his parents, and he says, "Can buy burro for 20, including outfit. Can sell at end of season for 10. Fine investment and useful. Wire immediately, as offer is for today only." And then his name is spelled wrong at the bottom, but presumably his parents knew it was him. And they sent the money. He got the burro. The burro was called Mistletoe. But this was part of how he was able to spend these extended periods of time in Yosemite, was that he began to work for the Sierra Club headquarters in Yosemite Valley. So he was earning a little money. He could be there all summer. He didn't have to rely on his parents for all of his support. And so this was a very important way for him to be able to extend his time in the wilderness and get to know it even better. We have some great letters in the exhibition that help us understand Ansel Adams in these early moments. The cases really chart his development as he learns about the Sierra Nevada and as he becomes a more sophisticated mountaineer and refines his photographic practice. So this letter in particular talks about photography. He's writing to his father on July 20th of 1923. He says, "Dear Pa, just another line to be sociable. Here are some views in Pate Valley and the Muir Gorge. They are poor prints and in no way suggest the quality of the negatives. The blacks are cold and hard. The detail in the highlights, especially the water, is clogged, and they do not show much detail. The developer is at fault, and the paper is too rough for such small prints. They are only proofs. The finished enlargements will be wonderful, as the negatives are microscopically sharp." So he's already, this is 23, he's 21 years old, and so he's already really trying to perfect his technique. He's thinking a lot about how to make photographs that convey what he's seeing and feeling and get these pictures across. And so he's writing home to his dad away while he's in Yosemite on Sierra Club letterhead to convey where he is in his process. This is a letter from a little bit earlier, and this is a little bit of an aside. So I've been working on an essay for a book that's about masculinity, and it's a whole book about photography and masculinity. And so I thought I might write about Ansel Adams. And I wanted to write about Ansel Adams because I feel like his pictures convey this sense of strength. I think they do, but also a kind of macho-ness, which, knowing Ansel Adams as well as I do, he was not macho. And I wanted to convey what he was actually like and maybe separate people's presumptions about him based on the photographs from who he actually was. And so one of the things that I like about this letter is that he writes to his mother. So this is a little bit earlier. This is in 1920. He's 18 years old. And I'm going to read from right there. He says, "I promise to be careful and will not be alone, as there is an old gentleman, Mr. Lewis, who's going along with the burro and me." And so he is constantly reassuring his parents that he's being careful. He's happy to admit when he's had a kind of scary episode out in the mountains and that something didn't go the way he expected. And so unlike a kind of independence and macho-ness, he's really very cautious. He's a very cautious only child. And so I think that's interesting to see. One of the things we talk about in the case is that this is a period of him finding his identity. He's learning about mountaineering. He continues to have a passion for the outdoors because of these important experiences he had as a young man. And one of the ways that you can see how much he's in formation is look at how different his handwriting is. So this is a period of 3 years of difference. The letter on the left was written when he was 18 years old, and the letter on the right is when he's 21 years old. And you can see how much his handwriting is changing. I love details like, look at that T T. Isn't that beautiful for Tuolumne Meadow? Whereas here, things have gotten a little more simplified. That J is not so, there's not so much flourish in it. But there are still these, this is his S at the end, this is goes, and the R's look like V's, and all the T's are capital T's. So anyway, it's interesting to see what his handwriting looks like and how much it's changing so rapidly as he tries to find himself, as he's becoming the adult that he will be. So next I want to talk about the Parmelian portfolio. And this is something that in 1927, a donor, a man named Albert Bender, who was a San Francisco arts patron, comes to Ansel Adams and says, I would like to help you. I am an arts patron and I want to help your career along. What if I help you sell a portfolio of prints? And so Ansel Adams thinks this is very exciting. He wants very much to be a photographer. There's not really such a thing as a job as a photographer in the early 20th century. So if you were going to be a photographer, you really had to hustle and cobble things together. And so this idea that somebody would help you sell your photographs was very exciting. And so Ansel Adams hadn't really thought much about what his audience was, or who might buy his photographs, or how he would package a group of photographs. But he had been making these mountain pictures for many years at this point in 1927. Like this one of Kearsarge Pinnacles that dates from around 1925. He was especially making them on summer outings with the Sierra Club. I'll tell you more about summer outings in just a minute. But he thinks, well, what I'll do is I'll bundle together 18 of these mountain pictures and we'll do a portfolio, all of mountain pictures. This is what the portfolio colophon looks like. It's the document that goes with the portfolio that describes what's in it. And on the left, you're seeing what one of the loose prints looks like. And the point of showing it this way is that you can see how thin the paper is. It's an uncoated paper. There you're seeing right through it to the paper folder beneath it. It's an uncoated paper and it was translucent. So Ansel Adams, as he created it, thought about how it would feel to handle each of these prints, and that as you touched them and moved them in and out of their folders, you would see them with light from behind, and that would actually make the print shift, and it would illuminate the shadows in different ways as you handled it. So here's an example of a print being held up out of its folder, and you can see that there's light coming in through the window behind and bouncing up off that white folder into the print and giving the print all of this backlighting, which made it look different than it does when it's in the folder. So you'll see up in the exhibition, we've created a case where the print is illuminated from behind. There's a little doorbell button that you get to push. It's interactive. So you get to push the button and it lights up the print, and you can see how the print shifts with light from behind. So Adams was really thinking about how people would experience his work, what would their kind of connection to the object be. And so he's thinking about that from very early in his career. The content of the pictures is also very important. To him, this is an example of moments in a hike. So he's trying to show people what a hike involves, all the different, there are pictures that look like campsites. There are pictures that are mountain peaks that you would see when you got to your destination. There are pictures like this where he's actually circumnavigating the lake. And so this is a view down onto the lake surface. And each of the pictures is a different component of what it was like to be on a hike. This portfolio did not sell very well at all, other than the other arts patrons that Albert Bender tapped to buy copies of the portfolio. It didn't really sell. And my supposition about why that's true is that Ansel Adams was so used to making these mountain pictures for other people who had had similar experiences that there was almost a shared photographic language that he was counting on people understanding, so that when they looked at these pictures, somebody else would be able to say, oh yeah, I can imagine that you're on a trail and you're walking around this lake and then you stop and you take this picture. But for people who had never hiked, which in 1927 was most people, these pictures didn't make a whole lot of sense. And they were so important to Ansel Adams, but they just really didn't connect with his audience the way he hoped. And so this was an early failure that he learned from and really pivoted on the basis of that experience. Now, this particular site, this picture is called Cloud and Mountain, but this is a picture of Marion Lake. And here's another picture also of Marion Lake. This was a very important place to Ansel Adams, and I'm going to read you just a little quote about Marion Lake. So while it was a place of significance to Adams, it was of even greater significance to his hiking mentor and companion, Joseph N. LeConte. In 1902, LeConte had named this glassy mountain lake for his wife, Helen Miriam Gompertz LeConte, herself an avid hiker and climber. And I'm pleased to say, ladies, that women were like 50% of the Sierra Club in these early years. Both married women and single women participated in all the hikes. So in LeConte's diary from the summer of 25, the year that his wife died, the July 25 entry at Marion Lake reads, quote, "Got up late, and after a good breakfast, I went around on the west side of the lake and found a beautiful white granite rock bedded in the meadow grass near the shore of the lake. At the foot of this, Helen, his daughter, and Joseph, his son, and I buried the ashes containing my beloved wife. I then drilled the rock and started work on the placing of the bronze tablet. In the afternoon, I finished the erection of the tablet and with Ansel's help, placed a flat boulder over the grave." So here, Ansel is not just photographing a lake. He's photographing this place that has such significance to his hiking mentor, and that he actually participates in memorializing Helen LeConte there at this site. As I mentioned, the Sierra Club plays a huge role in all of this, and this gave Ansel Adams community. As an only child, he was very precocious. He communicated with adults very well because that was who he was always around. I don't know that I mentioned, because I've given a number of tours this week, I'm pleased to say. But he dropped out of school around the age of 12. So he's completely self-taught, not only in photography, but also most of his education as a teenager and adult was self-directed. So within the Sierra Club, he finds a community of people who are like him, who have these same passions, who are interested in the same things, who are invested in the experience that you have when you're out in the wilderness. So he started to make photographs when he would go on these camping and hiking trips, and began to publish them in the Sierra Club Bulletin, which was a journal that was filled with articles that had been written by Sierra Club members. So this is an example of a picture by Ansel Adams of a Sierra juniper that was published in the Sierra Club Bulletin. The main feature of being a Sierra Club member was the summer outing. And for those of us who think of the Sierra Club or who think about what it's like to go hiking, it's a little hard to imagine what these outings were like. So this is one of the this was the first or the second outing, and it's from 1902. And look at the women in their skirts and their hats. Isn't this fabulous? And so these outings were 6-week trips in the wilderness, and they would go out in a group of 100 to 200 people and go out and hike and camp in the wilderness. There was a commissary, so they brought these huge stoves. Let's see if I have another picture. Yes, I do. They would bring these huge stoves out into the wilderness and cook the evening meal on these stoves. And so people would hike to the next camp, and then there would be this beautiful dinner for you. And then a really critical part of all of this was the campfire, because the campfire was when the group came together and there would be entertainment. So in the early years, when there was enough wood, they would build 2 big fires, and there was a stage between the fires, and people would have brought their violin, or people might sing, or they would all together sing campfire songs, or they might do little skits, or if there was an astronomy professor, he would give a lecture about the constellations and the stars. And so it really gave Ansel Adams that sense of a community that he had not had, because he missed his so much of his schooling. So here is this great quote that Ansel writes: "As the cool wings of night fold on the mountains, the campfire eats ravenously into the dark, and you come with others to sit on log or rock, or stretch out on the earth and give happy attention to the affairs of the clan." So this is not just he belongs to the Sierra Club. This is like an identity for him. This is Ansel Adams here in the foreground. So I mentioned that there was entertainment at these campfires. One of the things they would do is perform a play, perform a theatrical. And so they would actually rehearse on the camping trip. This is crazy to imagine. And then perform the theatrical for their other campers, hikers. And so this one, the play was called Exhaustos, and it was written by Ansel Adams. And let me find my quote. So it was a mock Greek tragedy in which King Dihydros spars with his archenemy Chrysippos of Pucha, while the traitorous Princess Clytemnestra aids her father's nemesis. So during the first act, the narrator, played by Adams himself and christened the spirit of the itinerary, proclaims, quote, "From 4 a.m. till 10 every night, the life of Dihydros is devoid of delight. Chrysippos is threatening, the queen gives abuse, his daughter's a traitor, his son's of no use. Oh, hard is the life of Dihydros the mighty. Among other things, he's forgotten his nighty." So Ansel Adams had a great sense of humor. He loved this communal activity, and so this is the kind of thing that was happening on the Sierra Club outings, which seems pretty delightful. And so here's a portrait of Ansel Adams during this period when he's out camping. This is the Sierra Club cup, and it was standard issue for all Sierra Club members. That way, if you went up to a stream, you could just scoop your cup in and help yourself to beautiful, cold, clear, unpolluted mountain water. Here's a tent in the background. So I like to think of this Ansel Adams and kind of fulfilling all of his dreams, all of his goals, and he's also then becoming a better and better photographer through this period. Next up is to tell you a little bit about his work for the Yosemite Park and Curry Company. So he's now worked for the Sierra Club. That's allowed him to be in the valley over the summer, taking care of the lodge. And he's becoming a larger and larger part of the community in Yosemite Valley, which was much smaller in this period of time than it is now in terms of the population, both the locals and the visitors. And he gets hired by the Yosemite Park and Curry Company, and they were the main concession in the park. So they provided the hotels, they provided the camps and the campsites. If you wanted to skate on the ice rink, you paid Yosemite Park and Curry Company. If you wanted to ride a horse and go horseback, you rented a horse from their stable. If you wanted any kind of, if you wanted to ski, you rented skis from them. They were basically the provider of all the activities and lodging and food in Yosemite Park. And so they were trying to promote more winter visitation. And it's, basic math. If you've got X number of hotel rooms and they're all full in the summer, the only way you can make more money is build more hotel rooms. Well, that's very expensive. Or you could fill those same hotel rooms in the months that they're not already full, which was most of the year because most tourists came to Yosemite in the summer months. So they had this idea that they wanted to promote return visitorship to Yosemite Park, and that they could do that by adding winter activities and by trying to promote the valley year-round. So this is one of the pictures that Ansel Adams made. And often his pictures to help promote Yosemite Valley were designed to show an activity because Yosemite Park and Curry Company wanted people to come spend money, but to show it in this landscape that you can ice skate other places, but you can't ice skate under Half Dome anywhere but in Yosemite National Park. And so that was really Ansel Adams's task, was to combine these aspects of this phenomenal, majestic landscape with activities that you might want to do on vacation. All those pictures were combined into this book called The Four Seasons in Yosemite National Park that was organized by season and was designed especially for the summer visitors to buy this book as a souvenir, and then it introduced them to all the things that they might like to do if they came back during the winter. So the largest section, the largest season of the book was summer, but the second largest season was winter. And that was really why they hired Ansel Adams, was to make these winter pictures. And so here we can see golfing. And for those of you who've been to Yosemite Park, most of these things no longer exist. You can't golf in Yosemite National Park. You cannot ice skate in Yosemite National Park. You can't ski there anymore. You can't toboggan. Can't ride a sled. But this was part of the way that they were promoting more use of the park at this time. So while Ansel was working for Yosemite Park and Curry Company, he was reporting to members of the marketing department, and they were the ones advising him how to make pictures. And this was new for Adams. Up to this point, he'd been making photographs of the mountains, and he was following largely in the footsteps stylistically of other Sierra Club members. And those pictures were informational. They were about describing what you see when you go hiking, and the trees and the mountains and the lakes. So the marketing department wanted Ansel Adams to make pictures that created a call to action, that were going to cause people who saw the pictures to want to change their behavior and come to Yosemite National Park, so that the person in Oklahoma City who sees the picture is like, what is that? That's a thing that I want to do. And I'm going to go next summer or next winter to Yosemite National Park. This meant that Ansel Adams was learning to make pictures in a very different way than he had done before. He hadn't really thought about pictures as a means of communication, and certainly not as a way to motivate someone to behave differently than they were already behaving. This was all coming from a marketing perspective. So Adams was not only making pictures, but he was actually doing other kinds of marketing work for Yosemite Park and Curry Company, including writing these blurbs on the back of, or in this case on the inside, of an Ahwahnee menu. So this is one of these menus. The main dining room of the main lodge in Yosemite National Park was called the Ahwahnee. And the way that they did their menus is as a souvenir. So each meal, each person got their own menu, which they could then take home with them. And I think this may say, additional copies of this menu for mailing may be secured from the dining room manager. Photograph on the cover is by Ansel Adams. Original prints of Mr. Adams's work are on sale in the gift shop. And so then he's also writing this text that tells you, far up in the crags of Yosemite's High Sierra, blue lakes sparkle like jewels set in rings of white granite. Here is an almost mystical grandeur, soundless but for the lap of water against the rocky shores and the splash of leaping trout. So it's all about how you can entice people to stay longer, come back and visit. And so Adams is responsible for the menus. He was also producing photographs that the PR department was sending out to newspapers to try and promote the valley. So here in this case, they'd had a really good snowfall, so there were record waterfalls that year. So here they've sent a bunch of Ansel Adams pictures. There it says, photos by Ansel Adams. And this is the San Francisco Chronicle. So they did a whole page of Ansel Adams pictures of waterfalls. Again, Yosemite Park and Curry Company is sending it out to try and get those San Franciscans to come out to Yosemite National Park. But then Adams takes this picture, which he made for Yosemite Park and Curry Company, and then makes a postcard out of it. And this is a real photo postcard, meaning he actually printed it as a photograph. This was a thing that you could do in the early 20th century, was get these real photo postcards. And then you would buy this in a gift shop and with an Ansel Adams picture on the front. You would write your message on it and mail it. These are still available on eBay. You can go and look. You're going to recognize them. The people selling them don't know that they're by Ansel Adams. If they did, I'm sure they'd be more expensive. You're going to recognize it because of this. All of the Ansel Adams postcards have this little cutout in them with the name. It's super easy to find them on eBay. Sometimes they've been mailed, which is kind of fun to see the notes that people have written on the back. And when they've been mailed, you know when they're from because it'll have the canceled stamp and the date. So Adams is thinking about how he can reuse these pictures in his own ways to create income for himself in the case of these postcards. And I thought the postcards were so cool that we actually ended up incorporating one onto the cover of my book for my book design. So this is the El Capitan postcard, and then it's inset, a replica of the postcard on the cover of the book. And I think I really like that because I think that my research on his work for the Yosemite Park and Curry Company is perhaps the most important contribution I've made to Ansel Adams' scholarship. So I like that the cover of the book points to the work that he's doing at that time. Okay, so now I want to tell you a little bit about his work for the national government, the federal government, and in particular, the Department of Interior. So this is a picture of Secretary of the Interior Harold Ickes, and this is his office in Washington, D.C. And what we're seeing here is a screen by Ansel Adams. So this is a 3-part folding screen, a Japanese-style screen that Ansel Adams made in the 1930s and was part of an exhibition that he did at the Catherine Koo Gallery, and it didn't sell in the exhibition, the little show that the gallery did. And Ansel Adams had met Secretary Ickes at it was a conference talking about creating new national parks. And so Ansel Adams was such a savvy networker that he realized, if I send this screen to the Secretary of the Interior and it's in his office, every day he's going to look at my photograph. And so that's what he did, and it worked. Here's the photographic evidence that Secretary Ickes lived with that screen just at his left hand. And so then in 1941, Ansel Adams gets a letter from the undersecretary who says, "We would like you to come to Washington, D.C. for a meeting. We are decorating the new Department of Interior building with painted murals of the national parks, and we think we'd like to have one by you in the photographic process." So Ansel Adams goes to Washington, D.C., and he doesn't want to miss this great opportunity. So he persuades the Department of Interior that they definitely do not want just one photographic mural by him, but really what they should do is hire him to travel throughout the Western United States, photographing all of the national parks. And since the Department of Interior is also responsible for things like dams and Indian reservations, he would happily photograph those things too. And so he gets hired by the Department of Interior to do all of these photographs. And so pictures like this one, many of the most famous photographs that we know by Ansel Adams were made as part of these trips when he was hired by the Department of Interior. And for me, they really represent this moment where Ansel Adams takes all of the threads of his life, all of these things that have been happening, his love of the wilderness from his teenage years, the community that he felt when he was with the Sierra Club, the learnings from working for a marketing department and producing images that are supposed to have an effect, a persuasive effect on people. And now he's got a commission from the federal government to photograph the national parks, which he loves, for the American people. The pictures are going to be displayed in a federal building where legislators and policymakers will see them, and they represent the American public, and they're going to be big prints. So he can make pictures that have this powerful effect. And so he takes all of those things and produces this body of work that is the work he is still famous for today. So this is the picture we talked about at the beginning with these characteristics that are part of his signature style. These are some more pictures from that same period in time where you can see these similar characteristics of the sweep of landscape, the omniscient perspective, the use of light and weather effects, and this zone system printing. I'm just going to ask you to look closely at this photograph. The example in the exhibition is a very different print. So just kind of take this in, and when you go upstairs and you look at this picture, think about this version of it. You could also just look it up on your phone while you're up there, and you can do the comparison right there between your phone and the picture that's in the exhibition. So he makes all of these amazing photographs while he's traveling around the United States for the Department of Interior. And basically that style never leaves him. He continues to make photographs. What happens is that the United States enters World War II, and so he's not renewed in this commission, but he wants to continue to make pictures of the national parks, so he gets a Guggenheim Fellowship and travels to the national parks that he isn't able to get to during the first initial trip. But the style is with him for the rest of his life. Okay, now I'm going to read just a very short passage out of my book, and then about one of Adams's most famous pictures, and then I'm going to take questions from the audience. Oft told, the story of making Moonrise is one of photographic legend. The creation of the Moonrise negative happened on a trip when Adams was accompanied by his son Michael, who we see here on the left, and his friend Cedric Wright, who's there in the middle, and that's Ansel Adams all the way to the right. They had been making photographs without much success in the Chama River Valley near Georgia O'Keeffe's Ghost Ranch in northern New Mexico. Driving back to Santa Fe, Adams hastily responded to what he saw before him. Quote, "In the east, the moon was rising over distant clouds and snow peaks, and in the west, the late afternoon sun glanced over a south-flowing cloud bank and blazed a brilliant white upon the crosses in the church cemetery." So that's Ansel Adams describing this scene. With the sun setting, he knew he had to act fast. Swerving his station wagon onto the side of the road, he commanded his son and Wright to help him set up his 8 by 10-inch view camera. Tripod, camera body, lens board, lens, dark cloth, loaded film holder, and light meter had to be pulled out and assembled before he could frame and focus the view. Made all the more urgent by the rapid descent of the November sun. In the frantic hustle, the light meter could not be found. Evaluating the scene before him, Adams miraculously remembered the luminance of the full moon, 250 candles per square foot, and was able to approximate an exposure for the scene. He released the shutter and captured the clouds, moon, and mountains beyond the little town of Hernandez. Before he could make a second backup negative, the sun dipped below the horizon and the opportunity was gone. With that single negative, Adam preserved a view that has become a photographic icon. The image at its core exhibits many of his mature stylistic elements. Adams filled the frame with a vast expanse of sky, the moon hovering above a bank of horizontally striated clouds and a long, low chain of mountains. He placed the chapel and cross-filled graveyard of Hernandez in the middle ground, bounded by a shrub-filled plain. The picture features a panoramic sweep of landscape and compellingly asserts that this perspective, with its precise arrangement of human edifice within a monumental and impressive environment, is the critical viewpoint for observing the scene. The drama comes in part from the relative scale of the elements. The endless quality of the sky reminds viewers of how small and seemingly insignificant we are. All of these visual qualities serve to inspire in the viewer a sense of awe in the face of a spectacular and unique visual experience, an appreciation for the natural scene, and a feeling of amazement. Unlike the mountain pictures of the late 1920s and 30s found in his Parmelian Prints portfolio or his Sierra Club album, Moonrise clearly conveys Adams's intensity of experience, his message about the transcendental possibilities for people when they are immersed in nature, and his deep appreciation for the American landscape. This proof print, seen here, is a straight or unaltered printing from the negative with no darkroom work, such as dodging or burning, that allows the manipulation of exposure to select areas of a print. As such, it affords a view of Hernandez that is much closer to the one Adams originally observed, albeit in black and white. From this view of the landscape, he envisioned, or to use his parlance, visualized, the finished artwork of Moonrise, Hernandez, New Mexico. Moonrise existed only in his imagination. He photographed a raw scene that he could transform in the darkroom into a symbol that would convey how he felt under a vast and beautiful New Mexico sky. By altering the relationship of the sky and the graveyard of the Hernandez Chapel to create a dark expanse over a shimmering village burial ground, Adams created from the raw material of the landscape an emotionally engaging image, one that borders on magic or mysticism. On that November day, Adams drew on more than 2 decades of wilderness exploration and photographic experience to create what would become his masterpiece. Deep and repeated contemplation had etched in him the value and meaning of immersing oneself in nature. Equally ingrained were lessons about making photographs that effectively convey an essential idea. Adams's early years had readied him for the scene he discovered along the highway as the sun set over northern New Mexico. Thank you. So Brian is going to be our question moderator. Yes, 2 questions. One is, what is his birth family situation that he was able to do all of these things and drop out of school and be tutored and go on trips and not have to have a job? Fair question. And number 2, when did he do his own darkroom work? So I would say that his family was a downwardly mobile, upper middle class family. So as a young man, they had a good amount of money. And so when he dropped out of school, because I suspect that were he alive today, he might be diagnosed as ADHD. He had a hard time with school. He couldn't sit still, he needed his body moving, and he was making all the teachers angry. So his parents pulled him out of school and set him up with a series of tutors. And in fact, in 1915, there was a World's Fair in San Francisco. He was 13 years old that year. His dad bought him a daily pass to the World's Fair, and that was how he was educated that year. He would just go to the World's Fair and wander around and look at the exhibits and talk to the exhibitors, and he would ingratiate himself with the person who ran the calculator machine, and so he would sit and do the calculator machine for the display. So yeah, he basically had very willing and doting parents who had just enough money through that period to afford that kind of lifestyle. But there had been changes in the family business, and so they were, that was kind of declining over the course of his lifetime. And and truthfully, what ends up happening is that he marries a woman named Virginia Best, and her income helped support him throughout his career. So it was a combination of him taking commercial jobs and her work that supported the family. He started doing his own printing almost immediately. So I don't know if it was the very next year after those snapshots of 1916, but by 1918 he's making his own prints. So almost immediately he buys a better camera. He sinks in really fast. And so he's making his own prints. And in the exhibition, you'll see the snapshots in the album, but all the prints on the wall are by him, printed by him, and some of them are just 2 years later. So the question is, how was he impacted by the two great historical events of his lifetime, the Great Depression and World War II? So I talked about how he was not very successful with that Parmelian print portfolio, but he really learned from that experience. And shortly thereafter, he joined two book clubs. One was called the Roxburgh Club, and one was called the Book Club of California. And these were associations of very learned men who were collecting fine books. There was a whole printing industry in San Francisco that had built up because it took too long for printing to get from the East Coast when it had to go by ship all the way south. And so San Francisco had a printing culture, and that turned into these fine books, fine bookmaking. So here's this young man, Ansel Adams, and he's surrounded by these book collectors, and he's thinking, okay, so I made this portfolio, didn't do so well, but I'm hanging out with these book collectors, and they've got money, and they're buying these books, and I feel like if I made a book, I could sell it to this group of people. And so he ends up creating a book. It's in the exhibition called Taos Pueblo. He partnered with Mary Austin, who was an essayist and Indian activist. She wrote an essay about Taos. He made 12 photographs, and he thought very hard about this. He thought, what these book collectors want is a really rare kind of book. So what could I do that would make a rare book that would be different from what's already available? So he took the paper that they were doing the letterpress printing on, and he gave it to his friend, William Dasonville, who created photographic papers. William Dasonville coated the paper with photographic emulsion, and Ansel Adams printed the photographs, actual photographs, in every copy of the book, so 108 copies of the book, 12 pictures per book. And then those pages were bound with the letterpress into a book. And this was so rare, there are almost no examples of fine bookmaking that have actual photographs bound into the book. I'm seeing nodding heads. We can think of examples where there are photographs tipped in to the book. That's not so unusual, because then you can make the photographs and you just add them. This was Ansel Adams dealing with these giant sheets of paper in his darkroom. You can't mess them up. So the book was sold for $75 in 1930. The stock market crash has already happened. $75 and $1930 is about $1,200 in today's dollars. He sold every single copy. So it's this great example of him going from just the beginnings of thinking about an audience in 1927 and not doing such a great job of creating a product to getting it. Like, oh, if you understand your audience and you know what they want, you just give them what they want, and then you can sell as many things as you have. And there's great correspondence between him and Mary Austin, where he's saying, I think we should charge more for the book and do fewer copies. And she's saying, $75 for a book? Are you kidding me? But he was right. These book collectors wanted a rare book, and so fewer copies made the book more desirable. So that's my Depression story. In World War II, Ansel Adams loses the commission from the federal government. He's really disappointed by that, and the large murals that he was commissioned to make, he doesn't make during his lifetime. He keeps writing back to Harold Ickes, please, couldn't we, get on this? If you have a little money, I'd really love to make the murals for the Department of Interior building. It never happened. But Ansel Adams, having grown up in San Francisco, was horrified by the internment of Japanese American citizens during World War II. These were his neighbors. These were the shopkeepers and the people that he worked with and lived with. And so he went to Manzanar. He got permission because the head of the Manzanar camp was actually someone he knew through the Sierra Club. So he was able to get permission to go and photograph at Manzanar, and he made portraits of the people who were imprisoned there. And it felt really important to him to document that these were American citizens, they were patriots, they were good people, and he wanted a record of that. He had a very hard time getting that work published and shown because it was not a very popular opinion. But he was really proud that he did something that he believed in, and that documentation, I think, is going to become increasingly important as it gives us insight into what happened during that period of time. Yeah.
What's the rest of the story of the Department of Interior photographs, those mural-sized photographs?
So the Department of Interior, those photographs are owned by the American people. Those images are all in the public domain because those negatives are owned by the federal government. And then what happened is during the Obama administration, the Department of Interior actually did make giant inkjet prints, which are now on view in the Department of Interior building. So you can read about them on the Department of Interior website, and if you visit in Washington, D.C., you can go see the prints. So the question is, what is the relationship between Edward Weston and Ansel Adams? So yes, indeed, Ansel Adams was living on the Monterey coast, just south of Carmel. Not far from where Edward Weston was living at Wildcat Hill, also just south of Carmel. They were friends. They were actually quite close friends from the time that Edward Weston was living in the Los Angeles area before he moved to Carmel. And I think Adams was a little confused by Edward Weston's introversion, because Ansel Adams was the opposite of that and wanted his pictures everywhere and was willing to take every job that came along. And Ansel Adams had infinite enthusiasm for opportunities, whereas Edward Weston's attitude was, why would I go make pictures for that person? I make pictures for myself. And I don't much care if nobody buys them or nobody sees them, because I'm not making pictures for other people. I'm making pictures for myself. And so there was some, I don't even want to say friction. I would guess that it was probably just a little confusion on Adams's part about why Weston was so different. But Adams cared very much for Edward Weston, and so in Edward's later years, he developed Parkinson's disease. And so Adams advocated for Edward Weston, and they actually, one of the things that his wife did was published books. So they published a book called My Camera on Point Lobos. That was a publication, all of Edward Weston's work. And Adams also tried to advocate for Edward Weston. So if there were opportunities, Adams would try and connect Edward Weston to those opportunities. But there's lots of great early correspondence where they're like geeking out over the temperature of the developer and, what happens if you raise it 1 degree, or if you use this kind of water, or if you do this kind of thing. I mean, they were very copacetic in their love for the medium, and I think they had a very close relationship. Yeah, good question.
We have time for one more question. I'm sorry, friends. Please, go ahead.
Oh, that's a good question. So the question is, what other brands of camera did Ansel Adams use? I'm going to keep this tight because I really could give another lecture about his different cameras and the relationships he had with different camera makers. But Ansel Adams was an experimenter, and he loved to just try different, he loved photography, he loved to try different things. So he had a long-standing relationship with Polaroid and tested Polaroid materials for Edward Land, who was the CEO of Polaroid. He had a Hasselblad camera, which he didn't use as much as other things. He had a 35 millimeter camera, not sure what brand that was, but he was mostly using large format cameras, so 8x10 cameras. And one of the disappointing things about the Ansel Adams Archive is that we don't have his early cameras, because as a technical person, as a gear guy, he was constantly upgrading. And so what happens when you upgrade? You trade in your old camera to get a better, newer camera. And so we don't have those old cameras because they were long gone, sold to somebody, traded, upgraded. So the cameras that we have are the ones that he had at the very end of his life, which are not the beautiful, wooden 8x10 cameras that he started with. But the shop has a copy of his autobiography, and that's a great place to learn about his relationships with the various camera makers. Yeah. Thank you all so much. It's been a delight.